Hey everyone, this is Julie, the cancer dietitian. If you're not familiar with me, I am a bona fide expert in oncology nutrition with the credentials to prove it. I'm creator of cancerdietitian.com and I'm the wellness director for cancer services in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. My credentials are that I am a registered dietitian. I am also a board certified specialist in oncology nutrition. This podcast is for anyone who has faced a cancer diagnosis or provides care for someone who has. I find that most of my followers are cancer survivors themselves, or they're somebody who personally know or have cared for somebody who's faced a cancer diagnosis. So today we are tackling the topic of soy, especially as it relates to breast cancer. The question is, should breast cancer survivors avoid soy foods? I call this actually the second most common cancer nutrition myth around. If you missed my first episode of the Cancer Dietitian podcast, I covered Does Sugar Feed Cancer, which is what I consider the most common cancer nutrition myth. I heard about this rumor around soy and breast cancer even before I became a full-fledged dietitian. So in 2004, I was at an internship at a local health department, and one of the supervisors was a breast cancer survivor, and she mentioned to me that her oncologist told her to stay away from soy products. And at the time, there were several different products available where they used processed soy, and so she had to make sure that she was looking to avoid those, and that was the first time that I'd heard anything about that. So fast forward 14 years and here we are in 2018, and still a question that comes up frequently for me. I was actually speaking at the Living Beyond Breast Cancer National Conference in Philadelphia recently, and a breast cancer survivor was telling me that her oncologist told her to avoid soy foods, and she described to me her difficulty as she was reading all the labels on all the products and trying to figure out if there was any form of soy in it. She was avoiding it, even if it was just soybean oil. So to me, when I hear these things, it doesn't make sense physiologically or nutritionally, because I know exactly how our bodies digest, absorb, and utilize nutrients. And nothing about it really makes any sense, because soy is a complex food made of many components. And if it were true that breast cancer survivors needed to avoid one particular component, then really the oncologists or whoever's recommending it should be able to give more specific instructions on what exactly to avoid, rather than telling a patient, well, just avoid all soy, because labels and ingredient lists can have all kinds of different soy components, and they don't all have ingredients that need to be avoided. So with that intro on the topic, I'm going to jump in and answering this question: can breast cancer survivors eat soy foods? And right up front, I'm going to call it Julie style. I'm going to give you the bottom line, and I do this to be nice to the people who aren't interested in all the ins and outs of nutrition science. They just want to get the answer and move on, which I totally understand, and I function that way in many areas. I don't think that it should require a nutrition degree to figure out what to eat or what to put on your plate. So there's lots of rumors regarding the relationship between soy intake and breast cancer survivors' risk of recurrence. However, current data on breast cancer survivors shows that soy in its natural food form has not been found to increase recurrence of breast cancer, and it is not recommended that breast cancer survivors consume powder or pill form of soy protein. So we want you to stick to the real food, which would be things like tofu, soy milk, edamame, and soy nuts. We actually even have research on breast cancer survivors showing that those who consume whole soy foods do not have a higher risk of recurrence, and possibly it may actually protect. So that's the bottom line right up front, is that there's no data showing that breast cancer survivors have to avoid soy foods. Now, when you want to get into kind of more of the nitty-gritty details, research has shown that consuming moderate amount of soy foods does actually help you. It's good for you, and it does not increase the risk for developing breast cancer. Eating whole soy foods is good for you. Soy is a great plant-based source for proteins. So if there are people, listeners, who choose to avoid animal proteins or meat, soy can be a great source of protein. Even if you're somebody who does eat meat, like I consider myself a flexitarian, which means that sometimes I eat meat and sometimes I don't. I consume soy foods all the time in terms of edamame. It's such an easy appetizer. My whole family likes it. I love to stir fry soybeans. I like tofu. We like soy milk. So there's lots of ways that you can include soy in your diet. Even if you are not a vegetarian or a vegan, it's still good for you. It's also important to remember that the source of soy is what makes the difference in this case. We would advise you to stick to food sources of soy and avoid the processed sources of soy like pills or powders, which if you haven't followed me for a long time, I've been writing cancerdietitian.com for 11 years now. And I've been doing a lot of classes and webinars, and I have individual clients and real life classes that I teach here at Cancer Services. This has been a consistent theme for me and for many oncology dietitians and dietitians in general, is that we want you to get your nutrients from food whenever possible because it's packaged up with so many other great things for you, as opposed to the processed versions of nutrients that you find in processed foods or even in pills, powders, and supplements. So I shared something on my Facebook page recently that basically it was this thing that just came to me like, why are people so obsessed with taking supplements? And oftentimes it's the same people who are real down on processed foods. And I see supplements as the most processed type of nutrition that you can get. So there are certainly times when you want to consume supplements, and that's when you have lab levels that are low or you have an actual deficiency. That's when you need to be taking a supplement. But otherwise, the best way to get your nutrition is in real food form. And this is true for soy too. So I would prefer that people stay away from soy powders. If there's a powdered protein supplement that you're adding to a shake or something, you want to read the ingredient list. If it's made out of soy protein, that's not my preferred way for you to get protein. I'd rather you got protein by actually maybe using tofu in your smoothie instead of some kind of powdered soy product. Okay, so soy supplements and powders can contain very concentrated amounts of soy, and you lose some of the other beneficial nutrients of soy when you consume the processed versions. So those are reasons that we would want you to avoid the processed versions of soy. The other thing to note is that soy lecithin, soybean oil, and soy sauce do not contain concentrated soy, so you don't need to avoid them when it comes to staying away from those pills and powders. The reason that I point this out is because soy lecithin is used in a lot of foods, especially foods with food labels, because it is an emulsifier. If you're not familiar with that word emulsifier, it just means that it can hold the oils and the waters together. So if you're having like a salad dressing where you're mixing oil and vinegar, of course it always separates. If you want something to stay together, you need an emulsifier. So a lecithin is an emulsifier. Sometimes, if you make your own salad dressing, you'll often be using mustard. Mustard can be an emulsifier. So there's nothing wrong with, having soy lecithin in your food. So if you're reading an ingredient list and you're trying to stay away from processed soy foods, soy lecithin is not something that I'm concerned about. So it's fine for that to be on the ingredient list. Soybean oil is also fine to be on an ingredient list. It's no different than olive oil in terms of it just comes from a different source, but there is not a significant amount of concentrated soy in soybean oil. And soy sauce, if you don't know, really doesn't have that much soy in it, but it has a whole lot of salt. So anyway, it can be a useful, kind of savory way to add salt to things, but it does not count as a soy food. So if you're somebody, a breast cancer survivor or another hormone positive cancer survivor that is concerned about the concentrated versions of soy, these three areas are not places that I would be worried about. The other thing that I think is really important is to remember that your habits are the most important things to focus on. So habits to me are things that you do 3 times a week or more. When it comes to soy, especially, you want to be eating the whole soy foods more often. We talked about that. So soybeans, soy milk, soy nuts, tofu are great things to add to your plates. Plant proteins, of course, we want you to eat these more often. So soybeans count as a bean, just like black beans, kidney beans, soybeans are in the same category. But nuts and seeds are also a great plant protein, so we want you to eat more of those. And we also want you to eat more fruits and vegetables. So I tell people my goal would be anywhere between 4 to 5 cups per day combined of fruits and vegetables. You know, soybeans are a vegetable. So that's the nice thing about if you're using plant proteins like beans, nuts, or seeds on your plate, not only is it giving your body protein, it's also helping to increase the number of vegetables that you're having in your day. And then the thing that we want you to eat less of when it comes to those habits, things that you do 3 times a week or more, we want you to eat less of that concentrated soy. So avoiding soy supplements, limiting processed foods made with soy protein isolate. So that's the thing that you want to pay attention to on the food label, is to limit foods made with soy protein isolate. And then red and processed meats, you want to eat less than 18 ounces per week. That's a whole nother topic for another day. And then refined grains and added sugars, you just want to limit the extras of those. And that you can learn more about in my previous podcast, which is episode 1 about sugar. The other thing that I want to cover as we're talking about soy foods today is that you can understand a little bit more about soy just by understanding the reasons that we recommend a plant-based diet for cancer survivors. What we talk about when we say the healthiest diet is a plant-based diet doesn't mean that you have to eat all vegetarian or all vegan. But what it means is that you should eat plenty of plants. And the reason that we recommend lots of plant foods is that plants have phytonutrients. So these are plant nutrients. Sometimes we refer to them as phytochemicals or phytonutrients, but they're things like antioxidants. They're things like beta carotene is one type of phytochemical. So there's all kinds of different phytochemicals that have been discovered so far, and they're all good for us. So when we talk about soy foods in relation to breast, ovarian, or endometrial cancer, there are some phytoestrogens in the soy that is what most people are concerned about. Phytoestrogens just means plant estrogens. Phytoestrogen refers to the phytochemicals in soy that appear similar to human estrogen in chemical structure. So I think this is really important to understand. Soy plants do not grow human estrogen. So soy plants are growing plant estrogen. Plant estrogens are chemically similar, but they are not identical to human estrogen. So that's really important to remember, because I think a lot of people, they assume, oh, well, those are plant estrogens. Well, that must mean that I'm eating estrogen. It doesn't work that way. Our bodies produce human estrogen at very high levels, so even the amount of plant estrogen that we consume in a soy food is very small compared to the levels that our body produces. But anyway, it's the phytoestrogens that a lot of the controversy around breast cancer and soy is coming from. So in the case of this person who said she was avoiding all forms of soy, what we want to really key in on is the fact that the active phytoestrogens in question are mostly concentrated in the highly processed soy supplements. So as I mentioned before, that's soy protein isolate or isoflavone-rich soy extracts. So isoflavones are the particular phytochemical that we're talking about that is a phytoestrogen or a plant estrogen. The concentration of isoflavones that you find in soybeans, soy milk, soy nuts, tofu is a perfectly healthy level for anyone, including breast cancer survivors. But what we want to stay away from is processing where you take that phytoestrogen or you take that soy food and then you extract out the isoflavones and then concentrate it into like a capsule or into a powder and then add it to different foods, because then the concentration of isoflavones is much higher than you would find in the whole food form. And that's really where kind of this controversy comes down. So in questions like this where research has not provided an absolutely clear conclusion, although I think we're in a good place right now to understand the link, I always find that it's important for each person to make their own decision. And so there's a 3-step process to that. First is you want to understand the facts. So you don't want to base your decisions on fear. You want to understand what is the information that we currently know. Then we need to understand the theories around why people are saying to do or not do something, and then figure out, if you trust that source of information, if the theories make sense to you, then you get to decide what's best for you. So that's what I want to walk us through today when it comes to these soy foods. So understanding the facts. We've already talked a little bit about this, but I also think we need to put into context that it's important to know that there are many more significant factors that can increase risk of breast cancer than simply eating soy foods. So some of the most significant risk factors when it comes to breast cancer and lifestyle are alcohol intake. So we know that drinking alcohol does raise breast cancer risk, which is why we encourage people that if they are going to drink, they drink only in moderation. We also know that physical activity can significantly lower somebody's risk for breast cancer. And we also know that breastfeeding is an important choice if possible, as it lowers the risk of breast cancer for mothers. Healthy diet, we've talked about a plant-based diet with lots of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and plant proteins, and then knowing your family history. So those are the most important things when it comes to lifestyle and breast cancer risk. So then the second thing to understand when we're talking about soy and breast cancer is how much research is there? What are the current theories around hormone-positive breast cancer and the isoflavones or those phytoestrogens found in soy? So numerous studies claim positive effects of soy foods on cancer risk, and other studies have found no effects or unwanted effects. So the key to this topic is to understand that there is some research on both sides. However, now that we've had more time to really look at this, I think it's important that you limit the research studies that you're considering to the ones that are actually done on humans. Because the early studies on soy and breast cancer, really, they were done in rodent models or mice models. And we now know that the way mice metabolize soy or phytoestrogens is not the same as how humans metabolize them. So it almost, those early studies really aren't that useful and they're not applicable to us as humans. So with the studies that we have out now and the American Institute for Cancer Research, they have a website, aicr.org. Great place to look up more of that data around soy, and they've even reviewed it, the studies that have been done on soy and breast cancer survivors done in humans. For hormone-positive breast cancer survivors, I think what's important to know is that even the most conservative recommendations would say 1 to 2 servings per day, which is the average amount eaten safely in Asian cultures, is probably safe for survivors. Some people are even more cautious. They say 3 to 4 servings a week, although now with the new research out, I don't see that recommended as often. I really see that people mostly stick to the eat whole soy foods and avoid the processed and powdered versions of soy. For those looking for cancer prevention or risk reduction, timing of the soy intake might also be important to cancer risk. And I think this is another big picture understanding around this topic, is that when we see the association between consuming soy in childhood and reduced breast cancer risk in adulthood, we've definitely seen that in Asian countries and among Chinese women, because they consume soy foods over a lifetime, which may have a long protective effect, as opposed to, in America, where sometimes we say, hey, I think that's good for me, then I'm going to try to overdo it. So really paying attention to, does the study look at long-term effects, or is this just a short-term effect? So that's something to keep in mind. When we talk about soy, what counts as moderate amount? I mentioned 1 to 2 standard servings a day is considered a moderate amount, and that's perfectly fine for breast cancer survivors, even hormone-positive breast cancer survivors, to consume. And studies have demonstrated as many as 3 servings of soy foods a day are not associated with an increased breast cancer risk. So that's the current data. Why have we heard so many people talk about an increase in breast cancer risk? We talked about the isoflavones, which are those plant estrogens, and high levels of estrogen itself has been linked to breast cancer. And so when we think about this, we have to wonder, okay, well, do plant estrogens raise human estrogen? We are not seeing that. And the other thing to note is, as I mentioned with alcohol intake, we do see with high levels of alcohol intake that actually does increase human estrogen circulating in the body, and that's something that we don't want. I would say there's even more of a link between alcohol and estrogen than there is with soy foods and estrogen. So soy consumption does not lead to increased estrogen levels in humans, which I also like to point out for men, because I have had some young men in some of my classes say, I was told I shouldn't eat soy foods because soy causes estrogen and then men will grow boobs, which does not work that way at all. Okay, so I see soy in the ingredients of a lot of the foods. Does that add up? So if you're eating multiple types of foods, is that something that's likely to add up? It is unlikely, because most of the foods where they've added soy proteins, which are cereals, bars, other products with soy concentrate in them, usually have small amounts. So you don't have to worry too much about it. But again, those are probably processed foods. So you want to be cautious and make sure you're choosing one that's more healthy than another one. Okay, so the other thing that people will ask is, well, if there is sort of this concern, why should I bother eating soy at all? Like, what's in it for me? If I'm a breast cancer survivor, why should I even consider it? And my point is that there are a lot of health reasons to consume soy. So we talked about, all right, soy is a great source of protein. Soy has phytoestrogens in it, and those plant nutrients are actually proven to be good for us. And then soy foods has lots of other plant nutrients that are good for us, lots of nutrients, so more calcium in them. Tofu is a great source of calcium as well as protein. Potassium, fiber, magnesium, copper, manganese are all found in soy when you eat the food form. And so those are things that are good for you, and we do encourage people to consume more beans in their diet. So that's why we would say eliminating soy is not necessarily a good choice, but it depends on your habits. If you just don't like soybeans, or you prefer black beans or kidney beans, to me, it doesn't matter which one you choose. Which brings us to the third step, which is deciding what's best for you. And no one else can make that decision for you. So now that you know the facts, you get to choose, okay, is this something that I want to include in my days or not? So no one answer for everybody. You get to evaluate your situation, the facts and theories, and then decide for yourself. I always say, well, if your oncologist who saved your life told you not to eat soy foods, but then this crazy dietitian is saying, oh, it's fine. That can sometimes leave you in an awkward place, especially around anxiety and fear of recurrence. And so if you feel like it's not worth the mental stress to include soy in your day, you certainly do not have to eat soy to have a healthy diet. There's lots of other plant foods that you can consume to get those good nutrients in your day. However, if you enjoy soy foods like I do, and you are up to date on the current research, I don't think there's anything wrong in including it. So you really can't go wrong. The one place that I would be cautious about is the processed soy that I would really stay away from. I like soy milk. I like tofu. I like soybeans. I told you that. I think they taste really good. And so to me, there's not a good reason to avoid them, but I do stay away from the processed bars. I wouldn't make soy shakes that are made out of soy powder, and I wouldn't be using a lot of other versions of soy that aren't, the normal kind of food form that it's grown as. So that's it on this topic. I thank you for listening today. I would love to hear your feedback or suggestions on future topics. For the next podcast, I'm planning to talk about the alkaline diet and cancer. So that's another hot topic. You can always find more information at cancerdietitian.com, and you can find me on social media. I'm at Cancer Dietitian on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Share this episode with your friends and encourage them to subscribe to the Cancer Dietitian podcast. Thanks, and see you later.